Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party and the Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020. And this podcast we call Green Socialist Notes. It's about continuing to educate and organize around the eco-socialist program that Angela Walker and I ran on. And today I'm not going to say much before we get to our guests because I want to maximize the time with them. And I don't have that much to say because I haven't been following the news. I've been out there petitioning every opportunity during the day, and just actually had the best 2 hours of petitioning at the women's rally for abortion rights today in Syracuse. I got 121 signatures in 2 hours. That's about as fast as people can write. I was carrying two petitions, and that helped. And all I will say, well, let me say this: if we could put the Hawkins Matera website up there in the donate button. We're paying petitioners, thank you. And we're in the last 2.5 weeks. It's going to be touch and go for us. It's 45,000 signatures in 42 days, the hardest petition we can find in the world. As I've explained here on this podcast, it's 3 times harder than the next hardest, which is running as an independent for the State Duma from an oblast in Putin's Russia. So we got a real challenge here, but we're doing our best, and we can use your help. If you can get to New York, we got a court ruling that threw out a law that barred out-of-state petitioners, so you can witness signatures if you're coming in from out of state. And of course, if you're in New York, now's the time to get out there and get signatures. So, and the donate is to help pay petitioners. We have a bunch out on the street. We're hoping to get some more from the people helping Matt Hogan on the ballot in North Carolina. They turn in Tuesday, so their paid petitioners may be free to come up here. So we've let them know that. So whatever you can do will be greatly appreciated. And, I've been just looking at the headlines when I had an opportunity. And, we had the millionth death of COVID. World Health Organization said we had over 15 million. And Congress can't get COVID money to help fund vaccines. I saw a little news report. They may have to ration vaccines. That's just ridiculous. As we've said, COVID, people want to be done with COVID, but it's not done with us. I'm out there petitioning with a mask and hand sanitizer because we're the COVID hotspot now here in central New York. Now, really, it's all over upstate New York, and it's spreading across the country. Voting rights, Congress not doing anything about that any more than abortion rights. Criminal justice, we had what they say were the largest demonstrations we've ever had in our country after George Floyd was murdered. And now the Biden administration, in fact, I saw another little headline where he was saying, if you have any COVID money left over, put it in police departments, as if that's going to reduce crime. As I explained last time, I think, or the week before, we had a guy shot to death with 2 cops standing 30 feet away in the bar district downtown. The cops, they can't stop the crime. You can investigate and catch the people that did the crime, but you want to reduce crime, we got to deal with issues like poverty and education. And of course, immigration, it's a big mess down at the border, really not much different than Trump. So, of course, that's why we need the Green Party. So that's all I'm going to say today. What I really want to do is bring in Steve Early and Suzanne Gordon, who have this book coming out. It's called Our Veterans, Winners, Losers, and Enemies on the New Terrain of Veterans Affairs. And they sent me a proof copy. I think it's coming out actually in August. And, I have to confess I haven't read it yet. I've been petitioning, but I told Steve that as soon as we get to June, I'm eager to look at this. I have skimmed through it. Being a veteran myself and in an American Legion post, these issues I hear about all the time. Dealing with Veterans Affairs and so forth. So before we get to those topics, let me just introduce Steve and Suzanne. Steve was 27 years a union representative for the Communication Workers of America, and he had earlier experience in union organizing. And he's the author of 4 books on the labor movement, or 3 books on the labor movement that I've read, and I recommend you read them. Embedded with Organized Labor, 2009, The Civil Wars in U.S. Labor, 2011, and Save Our Unions, 2013. And we've talked about Jane McAlevy's book, what is it? No Shortcut or something like that. But that's what we talked about. Steve has perspective you should also read about too. And then he wrote a book called Refinery Town, Big Oil, Big Money, and the Remaking of an American City about Richmond, California, the Richmond Progressive Alliance, and what they did with the Green Mayor at the time, Gail McLaughlin. There's a lot to learn there for all of us doing local political work. And he just had an article out, and maybe we can get this in the chat right now. It's the one in Jacobin magazine about Texas soldiers in the National Guard organizing a union because that crazy governor in Texas, Abbott, has been sending them down to do border patrol, and they have other issues. So they're trying to organize a union, which when I was in the Marine Corps, we had something called American Servicemen's Union, which was as much anti-war as union organizing back during the Vietnam era. And I knew at the time the Dutch had a union, so I joined it. And so that is a very interesting article and relates to some of the topics we'll talk about today. And then Suzanne Gordon is a journalist and author who's been writing about healthcare and healthcare systems and patient safety and nursing for years. I'm not going to list all her books. There are at least 18 I know about. She's a professor at the University of California at San Francisco School of Nursing. A lot of her books are about nurses' issues, working conditions, staffing, and healthcare delivery. But the two most recent books, 2017, The Battle for Veterans Healthcare, and 2018, Wounds of War, How the VA Delivers Health, Healing, and Hope to the Nation's Veteran. So it's probably veterans, I misspelled it. So that's who we got on with us. And Steve and Suzanne, why don't you just tell us why you came to write this book? And, veterans, some of our viewers are veterans, but most aren't. Why should those of us who are not, be concerned about these issues?
Well, why don't I lead off? We kind of explained the different paths that we took to the subject matter in the preface to the book. Mine was certainly different than Suzanne's, but overlapping a bit. As you just noted, Howie, I've been active in the labor movement for about 50 years now. And during my many years on active duty with the Communication Workers of America and working with other labor organizations, I obviously worked closely with many veterans who became trade unionists. About 1 million former members of the military are now union members. And some of the best stewards, and strike leaders, and organizers I ever worked with in the United Mine Workers, the steel workers, the Teamsters, and in the communication workers for many years were actually people who had military experience of one sort or another. And what I was struck by when I started to become more familiar with the veterans healthcare system is how much better it is for people who've worked as a soldier than our state-based system of workers' compensation, which covers civilian workers, and which I know you've been involved in efforts to try to improve and reform in New York State. As in most states, when workers get hurt, when they suffer from some long-term occupational illness, it's often a big struggle to get benefits, to get rehabilitation services. A lot of our state workers' comp systems really suck, and they don't provide the kind of benefits and kind of health care and rehabilitation that injured workers need. Veterans, however, the 9 million former members of the military who qualify for VA care actually are the beneficiaries of a model workers' comp system, even though it's not often thought of as that, because people don't associate military service necessarily with work. They think of it as a higher calling, a patriotic duty, and other conceptions like that. Anyway, I spent many years bargaining or helping workers bargain about healthcare coverage. As you know, that's a terrible battle in both the private sector and the public sector. We need national health insurance, a national healthcare system. And as I became more familiar, largely from working with Suzanne and helping her with her writing about this, it was clear that the VA is actually a better model for a national healthcare system than the one that we've all been struggling for many years, the single payer-based Medicare for all system. So we could talk more about some of those differences, but that's pretty much how, out of my own labor experience, knowing veterans as union members, helping injured workers deal with a bad state-based system of workers' comp, seeing how the VA is in many ways better than that, and then seeing that the VA really provides a model for how we could deliver healthcare more accessibly with greater quality for all Americans, really got me interested in Veterans Affairs.
And how about you, Suzanne?
Well, I come at it, I come at the veterans issue because the book is about, there's a fair amount about VA in it, but also a lot about just the role veterans play in politics and really the kind of situation that veterans face when they're doing work in the military. And I have been writing about healthcare, oh my goodness, for something like 40 years. I can't remember, it's been so long. And I have written a lot about the private sector healthcare system and its brokenness, and also some of the things that could set it right. And in about 14 years ago, I became very interested in the VA healthcare system, which I think, most people know exists. We've all seen, VA hospital exit here on the highway, or we passed a VA hospital, but most people don't really kind of know what's going on in those hospitals. And because of my interest in healthcare and health systems, I edited a book series on healthcare for Cornell University Press for 17 years. I decided I wanted to find out how a really genuine healthcare system in America, a socialized health system, works. And I spent years doing work on my book, Wounds of War, and also becoming more aware of attempts to privatize the VA, because in America, we can't have a good collective social system for all of us without trying to mess it up, it seems, because capitalists, really want the money that's in that budget to go to private sector pharmaceuticals or doctors or hospitals. So I wrote this book about VA healthcare, and then in the course of writing a book about VA healthcare, you get to know a heck of a lot of veterans. And I became very interested in the issue of the military as work and what kind of employer, the DOD is. And you've experienced that obviously firsthand. But, there's a huge attempt to recruit young, mostly poor folks into the military. And they promise education and healthcare and, all kinds of job training. And so part of our interest in writing this book was, okay, what kind of employer is the military? What kind of issues do the people who are service members encounter when they are employed by the Pentagon? And then what kind of problems are they left with when they leave military service? And we looked in depth at that, and I was very interested in that issue. And then, of course, that leads into the healthcare and benefits system. So it's kind of a lot of different threads. We have a co-author. Our co-author is a young investigative journalist named Jasper Craven, who worked with us, and he comes to this book with having written a lot about military service and the VA and so forth. And Jasper and I are both fellows at a group called the Veterans Healthcare Policy Institute, where we both work.
I can vouch for what Steve said about veterans. As a Teamster, I was there a couple decades, and the Vietnam vets were still around when I got there. I mean, I'm sort of the tail end of the Vietnam vets, but guys that got in there, 5 or 10 years ahead of me, they were the ones that didn't take crap from management. They knew how to file grievances. when contract time came around, they were the leaders in getting other workers engaged in, fighting for a better contract. And, I've noticed the drop off since those guys retired, which leads into a chapter in your book where it compares the decline in unions and veterans organizations. And I would say political organizations. People are not part of organizations now. So you want to elaborate on that point in your book?
Yeah, that was another thing that I noticed primarily, coming from a labor movement background, that kind of parallel, as you mentioned, between the organizational decline of old-line veterans organizations, the American Legion, the Veterans of Foreign Wars. There's a constellation of older veteran service organizations known as the Big Six, and the overlapping labor organizations that many people belong to both. They're a member of a local union, they're a member of a Legion post, they're a member of the VFW if they served in the military overseas in a war. And both organizations provide basic services. A union, as you know, helps members with job-related problems, with grievances, with benefit issues. Veterans organizations, one of their primary attractions, one of the reasons people sign up is getting help with VA disability benefit problems and issues, answers to questions about how to apply for health coverage or GI Bill benefits. Veterans organizations, like unions, are fraternal organizations. They have meeting places. They sponsor social events. They sponsor sports leagues. They provide a source of community and solidarity in addition to this kind of individual representation role. And also, for better or worse, depending on the issue, they're advocates and they're involved in politics. And obviously, the veteran population has shrunk in recent decades since the abolition of the draft, as the biggest generation of veterans served in World War II and Korean War. More and more of them have died off. And there has been really a parallel decline in political clout and influence, membership, that you can see both in organized labor and in veterans service organization. And that's often to the detriment of predominantly poor and working class Americans who belong to one or the other type of organization or both.
Well, and I think also that, as in with many unions, I mean, one of the reasons why there's a decline in veteran service organizations is that they really haven't changed enough with the times. I mean, they haven't been accommodating to people of color, to women. There was a pretty extraordinary episode that we wrote about where during the George Floyd protests, I mean, some of the VSOs really were very unresponsive, and several women of color resigned. They're pretty misogynistic. It's a very old boys culture, and not only that, but they often are their membership excludes veterans who have the wrong kind of discharge. There's a whole group of veterans, as we describe in our book, who are discharged from the military with a discharge called other than honorable that denies them VA benefits of any kind. And some of the veteran service organizations, the Legion, the VFW, AMVETS, et cetera, do not allow these folks to be members. It's only 600,000, but I think it's symbolic of a kind of exclusive network of people. And it's very tragic because these people who have these punishing discharges and often retaliatory because they might have reported a commander who raped them or whatever. These people are often people of color. Certainly in the Vietnam era, that happened to people of color. To to veterans of color. So it's symbolic, I think, of their refusal to kind of change with the times, and so it's really they haven't done a lot, I think, that make them more welcoming to younger veterans. I mean, it's very tough to bring these younger veterans in, because I think that people, as you know, certainly after COVID, you know, to bring younger veterans in, because they tend not to join things. And so there's a whole group of new veterans organizations, some of them problematic and some of them not, that have come up and that don't have, you know, this kind of membership structure, that are contending for space in this veteran service community.
Yeah, I just want to note that there are exceptions. My American Legion post was originally all black because of segregation. It's called Dunbar Post for 1643 in Syracuse. And they recruit, you know, outside the black community. That's how I got in there. And they actually play a big role in democratic politics in this city, although they put up with me as a Green. They don't hold it against me. And they do a lot of service work in the community. And, you know, coming up, I played American Legion baseball and basketball. So, but you're right, the younger generation, you know, I'm sort of, you know, we do have some first Iraq War veterans, but Afghanistan and, you know, post 9/11, we don't have many members from that group. And you're right, they're not joiners, you know, of organizations. And that, you know, I think is a problem across unions and veterans organizations, also politics. So we're talking about the VA as not just a socialized insurance system, but a whole socialized medical system. And I think it's interesting. You may have seen, maybe we can get this in the chat. There was an article in The Nation at the end of March called Medicare for All is Not Enough. It talks about how corporations have taken over the hospital and the whole delivery system, so that we need a national health service, a socialized medical system, not just the insurance. And, you know, the VA has been a model of that. Maybe you could say a little bit about the good parts and then the bad parts, because, you know, they're trying to privatize that too.
Well, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the VA is our most successful American healthcare system. And it's not just my opinion. I mean, VFW did a survey of veterans and 92% of them support the VA. And then there's countless scientific surveys that document the superiority of VA healthcare over private sector healthcare. There was just a survey, an article that came out in the British Medical Journal that said that if you're a veteran and you have Medicare or VA and you're taken to a non-VA emergency room, you have a 46% increased chance of dying outside of the VA than inside of the VA, and it will cost 21% more. And that's because the VA is not just an insurer, but a provider of care, and they provide coordinated care. And that means that your mental health, you know, therapist will talk to your oncologist, will talk to your primary care doctor, talk, as opposed to just send messages in the chart. They will actually confer. People are on salary, they're not in fee for service, and care coordination is really critical. But the tragedy now is that, and so let me finish my thought, I guess, that I think that the VA model of care, which I wrote about in Wounds of War in great depth, is a model that really all of us should be having, because care coordination, integration, not being at the mercy of fee-for-service physicians or hospitals, and also now increasingly private equity firms are owning healthcare. I think this is something that's a model for all of us, and I personally believe it should be VA for all. And some people are beginning to think that way too. But I think that the real fight now is for against the destruction of the VA model, because there are so many people that want to privatize it. And we discuss that in the book. And tragically, a number of the VS veteran service organizations like the Legion and VFW have been supportive of laws that have accelerated outsourcing of VA care to the private sector. 20% of the VA's clinical budget now goes to private sector providers, in spite of the fact that they're more expensive and deliver poor quality of care, and that's consistently documented. But it's kind of like, the charter school situation, where you create this phony choice and you destroy the public option, and then you try to reform that and bring back the public option, and then people get angry, like, why are you taking away my private sector doctor, even if that private sector doctor is not really helping you? So it's a very complicated system and situation. And I think one of the best things that people could do in the single payer movement, the Medicare for All movement, is not just get up to speed about why VA healthcare is actually so good, but really fighting the privatization, because there's not going to be there's not going to be a VA system for anybody to emulate if this isn't fought and really fought now, because it's a very heated battle right now.
Yeah, I know the veterans organizations and sometimes unions do this is, well, we got benefits for our folks. We don't want the public sector covering other folks.
No, that's exactly.
They're dividing and conquering themselves by doing that. Somebody's giving them that line and they've taken it.
No,
it's very parallel phenomena. This let's circle the wagon around our benefits. Let's not, support any universalization of our access to affordable higher education through the GI Bill or better healthcare through the VA. And this is so bad in some of the veterans organizations that historically, they've been resistant, as Suzanne mentioned earlier, to expanding VA coverage to more veterans. I mean, there's only 9 million VA patients. There's 19 million veterans. So more than half of all veterans, either because they're not low income enough or they haven't established that they have a service-related condition, they haven't met overly restrictive eligibility rules. So the VA system isn't really, universal for all veterans. And so part of the struggle is starting from where we're at and finding ways, rather than to dismantle the VA and outsource more of the care that it provides, to extend VA coverage to more people that actually served in the military. We could talk more about the many ways that in emergencies, the VA has served non-veterans, is continuing to do so now in pandemic situations and other places where there's a rural healthcare crisis and shortage of private sector providers. And the VA is already providing care in a number of places to non-veterans. But there's a lot of veterans who would benefit from it too, because they don't have decent job-based coverage.
Their families don't.
Their families lack job-based coverage, or if they're on Medicaid or Medicare, they're paying more out of pocket. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why VA care would benefit millions of more veterans than currently benefit from it.
Yeah, that article I mentioned, I neglected to say that the authors were prominent in the single payer socialized insurance model for decades. And now they're saying it's too late for that, given the corporations and Wall Street moving in on delivery, so that we need to go to something more like the VA, a National Health Service model. People should write their questions. I saw one in the chat. There are two topics I'd like to get you guys to respond to, and then maybe we can go to questions and answers. One is the Texas National Guard organizing. There's an article we can put in the chat that Steve wrote up that So Steve, why don't you, just say, what's going on down there in Texas and why these National Guard members, who are probably not, flaming liberals in Texas joining the National Guard, but they're union organizing. So what's going on down there?
Well, it's actually a broader phenomenon. It also involves some similar public sector organizing in Connecticut involving the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. Really got started last year when tens of thousands of Guard members around the country were called up to help respond to the pandemic. And we're doing all kinds of emergency service work, setting up field hospitals and responding to civilian needs, and working alongside other state employees in states like Connecticut and Texas. And the AFSCME in Connecticut enlisted the Veterans Legal Clinic at Yale in challenging what has been for, as you know, more than 45 years, a federal ban on unionization of military personnel, basically making it a criminal act to try to organize active duty soldiers. And the Biden Justice Department, to its credit, issued an opinion that basically said that National Guard members, they weren't called up for federal duty, but were just under the control of the governor and working within their own state on so-called state duty, were actually eligible to join and form state worker unions. And so AFSCME in Connecticut started signing up Guard members. And in Texas, my own union, the Communication Workers of America, has an affiliate called the Texas State Employees Union, has about 8,000 members. It's an open shop union, collective bargaining for public employees. Doesn't exist really in Texas. They don't have the right to strike. But the Texas State Employees Union has been organizing a non-majority union for 40 years, and people in all kinds of white-collar and blue-collar jobs at all levels of state government are eligible to join. And through direct action and lobbying and membership mobilization, try to improve their terms and conditions and how the state legislature and various governors are treating them. They were approached by members of the Texas Guard who've been sent by this right-wing governor, Greg Abbott, to police the U.S.-Mexico border. And many of them don't want to be there. They're on an extended tour of duty with very little to do. It's largely viewed as a political stunt designed to help Abbott get reelected or survive a Republican primary, which he just did. And Texas National Guard members, many of them signed up like people sign up for the Marines or the Army for the education benefits. So at the same time, the Governor Abbott was proposing to spend $2 billion on this National Guard deployment to the border, he was cutting tuition assistance. That was one of the main reasons people sign up to become members of the Texas National Guard. So with that and a number of other work-related issues, the TSCU started working with Guard members. They created an organizing committee, started signing people up. They've developed their own mission statement, and they're going to be lobbying the state legislature along with other state workers next year to try to address the abuse of their service by this Republican governor.
The other topic I wanted you to speak about is veterans in politics, and you call it playing the veteran card. Democrats have been doing that since Rahm Emanuel was recruiting veterans during the Iraq War 2006 cycle. So talk about that. And
Yeah.
while you're talking about that, there's an article that Steve wrote about Matthew Ho that everybody knows. That if they haven't seen the article, they should check that out, because the Greens can play it too, but we play it a different way. So
there's a real attempt to, mostly by folks like Jeff Bezos and very sort of corporate, either Democrats or Republicans, to paint veterans as somehow this noble group that is above the fray, that has, that is somehow nonpartisan, won't get involved in partisan bickering. These veterans have, all this great solidarity. They'll reach across the aisle. They have, foreign policy experience by virtue of the fact that they were, beating down doors in Iraq or wherever. And it's quite extraordinary. Steve can talk about their records more, but the idea, the kind of idealization of the veteran as somehow above the fray, some noble warrior above the fray, belies the fact that there is no homogeneity within the veteran community. There's, right-wing veterans, left-wing veterans, and they also, there's not a lot of solidarity among veterans. Some of my Vietnam vet friends who I are very close to, but are pretty nasty about, people who weren't in combat or who were in Vietnam, but who, weren't in the infantry, or, the Marines are better than the Army. Veterans are no better than anybody else in the human species about tribalism or getting along with each other and supporting each other. And the other thing that I think is really important to recognize is that military culture is, and we go into this a lot, there's such a thing as military indoctrination, and it really doesn't teach people to think outside the box. It teaches people to stay in the box and obey orders. It doesn't encourage leadership except in a very narrow frame. And also, being in another country as a service member, particularly in combat, does not give you a wide experience of that country. As one member of Common Defense, a progressive veterans organization, said, the fact that he was in Iraq or Japan or wherever, it doesn't give him much more knowledge of that culture than, a junior year, a semester abroad, maybe even less, because the experience of going to a combat zone, you're not like hanging out with folks in cafes on the corner, drinking coffee with the foreign nationals. I think that the record of service candidates, as Steve can go into this more, but certainly you see this with VA privatization. They are, many of them are very much in favor of that, particularly the more corporate Democrat or corporate Republican they are, and the more beholden they are to private sector money from the pharmaceutical industry or the hospital industry. And I think Steve has a bit more to say, and certainly even on militarization and foreign policy issues, Veterans in Congress record is not, at least from a progressive point of view, or even from any kind of bipartisanship point of view, particularly encouraging.
Yeah, I think it's the recruitment of so-called service candidates by both major parties, which we describe in the book, is an expression of the duopoly. It's big money getting behind corporate Democrats or conservative Republicans who've been carefully vetted, but who've served in the military and can play that card as a candidate. And some do successfully, some don't. But the real test is when they get into Congress, are they any different than any of the other people around them who didn't serve in the military? Are they any better on foreign and military policy issues? Are they even any better on issues affecting fellow veterans? Half the members of the House who served in the military back in January voted against an expansion of post 9/11 GI Bill benefits. It was too costly. It would cost $2 billion over the next 10 years. Not a lot of money, but so that's the kind of solidarity that some of these right-wing veterans, like Dan Crenshaw, former Navy SEAL, was a well-known right-wing Republican congressman from Texas, or Tom Cotton from Arkansas. You got a new rising star, J.D. Vance, who served in the military. It's wants to, be the next Republican senator with Trump's backing from Ohio. A bad crew on the right, but the Democrats, are they much better? Seth Moulton, who's trying to out Biden on, spending tens of billions of dollars to make the situation in the Ukraine worse. Jason Crow, another guy in Colorado, who actually slowed down Trump's attempt to withdraw from Afghanistan by working with Liz Cheney. Connor Lamb, who's hopefully going to lose a primary race in Pennsylvania, trying to move from the House to the Senate, but who's the corporate Dem candidate in the race. There's a lot of examples. Mayor Pete, who's now in Biden's cabinet, was the billionaire's favorite in the Democratic presidential primary field in 2015, 2016. A few brave exceptions: Tulsi Gabbard, obviously the your ticket, Howie, 2 years ago, and Matthew Ho running today. Downstate New York today, Brittany DeBarris, who was a great leader of About Face, the anti-war veterans organization of post 9/11 veterans. She's up against another veteran, Max Rose, in a primary race in the 11th Congressional District. She's running as a Democrat, but she's got pretty strong anti-war veteran credentials. So, but it's tough because you're going to have to rely on small donors or third-party support. You're not going to be the flavor of the month in the donor class of the Republican or Democratic Party, even if you've served in the military.
Yeah, we got one of those candidates here. You got the designation from the Democrats here in Onondaga County, which is the biggest county in this congressional district, although we're not sure what the lines are because the Democrats gerrymandered it so bad it got thrown out in court. That gets into a whole lot of stuff, including our petition. I'll leave that alone. But I probably got 60 emails from this guy, and his whole pitch is, I'm a Iraq Navy commander, combat veteran, now in the reserves. I can beat the Republican. Give me money.
That sums it up.
Yeah. It's about as vacuous as you can get.
What are they going to do when they're in Congress? I mean, it's it's the same. It's sort of a same identity politics, pitch, and the issue is what are you going to do? I mean, somebody like Bernie Sanders, who was never a veteran and an anti-war protester all his life, I mean, he has been much more friendly to veterans than a lot of veterans in Congress.
That's right.
And but there's an appeal, obviously. I mean, there's an appeal about the reality. They appeal about to our sacred trust for in veterans that really belies both what we're doing to help them and what the reality of the situation that they face is, and what will help them clearly in Congress is, I mean, the VA budget never matches the Pentagon budget, and there's constant from these veterans in Congress, we can't spend that money on this and we can't spend money on that for the VA, where they not only give money to the Pentagon, they not only give the Pentagon what they ask for, but they say, oh, why don't you take some more, and so it's a pretty interesting situation, I think, that very few people have written about.
So let's go to some questions. And if it doesn't pop up on the screen, okay, we can see what we got. Yeah, is there a theory of why younger vets are not joining these organizations? That's from Tired Allison.
Well, I think Suzanne mentioned some of the reasons. The old line veterans organizations. I mentioned some of the positive cultures of aspects of the veteran service organization functioning, the services to members, the fact that members pay dues, they elect leaders, they function much more like labor unions. But as Suzanne mentioned, there's big generational differences. Younger veterans, some of whom don't want to be in the toxic environment of a veterans post where gambling, smoking, drinking are still some of the main activities, along with others. And it's just not a scene that women, people of color, feel particularly comfortable with. So they've created their own organizations. The problem with the new veteran service organizations, as we call them, is that they're kind of built on the NGO model, the nonprofit. They're very corporate. They're very corporatized. They don't have any democratic internal structures. They don't really have dues-paying membership for the most part. They have boards. They have executive directors. Some of them have good politics. Some of them don't have such great politics. But they really don't function as membership organizations. And once you start relying for your financing, whether you're a worker center purporting to represent and advocate for immigrant workers, or a veterans organization purporting to speak for veterans, but most of your money comes from wealthy individuals, from corporations, from foundations. The priorities of your organization are not always going to be, consistent with what veterans who are poor and working class really need as a voice in politics or as an organization that provides services to them.
In terms of a theory, I read a book quite a while ago by Theda Skocpol called Diminished Democracy. And it came out about 2004. And it's been a while, but what I seem to remember is really about 1970, all the volunteer civic organizations, political committees and political parties, labor, the kind of organizations like Masons and Elks, and I'm leaving some out, but diminished across the board. And as I recall, she talked about media. People sit home and watch TV instead of, go to their organization in the evening. Culture of individualism, atomization, breakdown of communities. I think, used to have a lot of small towns where everybody knew each other and they had these clubs, and it was cross-class, working class and middle-class business people who, found commonality in some of these organizations. And I think the other thing, and I can't remember how much I'm just thinking out of my head and how much she said, but I think what Steve said about the nonprofit corporate model, which is not a membership model, and it's very kind of top-down, and, members are asked to give money and, sign a petition online, but that's about it. So if you're looking for a theory, I would suggest checking that book out. So next question, Scout Trooper 164. Is the treatment of vets why fewer and fewer members join the military?
Why fewer?
Why the military is smaller?
No, I think I think that the reason why the military is smaller is because we have an all-volunteer force. There's no conscription. It's kind of up to you. And, people who are more, wealthier are not going to join just because of patriotism, right? And so the military is really a kind of poverty draft now. And people join the military. I mean, it's very clear that the military itself, if you look at the ads for, Go Army and so forth, the pitch is not, really patriotism or, go bash the enemy. It's, get better benefits, get healthcare when you're finished, get free education, learn a profession, be everything you want to be, which doesn't exactly work out, sort of works out for the officer class sometimes, but not for the enlisted man or woman. Also, I mean, in 2003 or whatever, there's been a lot of reliance on contractors to do military work. And which actually deprives service members of the opportunity to learn jobs that don't involve kicking down doors and being shot at or shooting at other people. The military contracting issue is a very significant issue, and I think, what is it? I can't remember the statistics. 1 in 4, or it's a very high number of people who, used to be doing logistics or mechanics or fighting or being a cook or working in laundry or what a clerk is now done by contractors. And so that means that the actual fighting is done very deliberately by a smaller group of people who are being asked to go on more and more deployments and really put themselves in harm's way in a way that was not true in the past.
I would say that that the sexual abuse and harassment scandals really horrendous at places like Fort Hood in recent years. There's a lot of headlines that if people notice them, might raise some questions about the promises and assurances and claims that a military recruiter is making. But the Pentagon has a huge budget to subsidize and operate and support junior ROTC programs all over the country. A huge network of military recruiters tied into military training in public high schools. They target school systems and public high schools where there are a higher number of lower income students. And more than half of all people who end up signing up and enlisting, they tell pollsters it's because of the future education benefits and the promise of 3 or 4 years of stable income, housing, uniform allowance, and learn a trade. And when you get out, you're going to be eligible for the VA, which, as we discussed earlier, half of all veterans are not. And you'll be able to afford higher education. That is the main selling point. The military is really exploiting the student debt crisis. If there was student debt loan relief, there'd be a lot fewer people, signing up for the military.
Ditto if we had.
And it's one reason why Biden won't do that. It would really impact negatively recruitment for the so-called all-volunteer military.
Yeah, so would any kind of national health system or Medicare for all. I mean, the 2 pillars of recruitment are education and healthcare. And if you took those pillars away, I think they'd have to bring back the draft, which we've debated, and I personally think they should do, but he doesn't, so we won't get into that.
I was against the draft when I got drafted, but Charles Rangel kind of convinced me, in my old age, that if it was a draft army, you couldn't send them to Iraq or Afghanistan. They'd revolt like they were doing in Vietnam. So there's an argument for that. In terms of poor
we
people.
got the issue in the book because we couldn't agree, but I think Rangel made a very strong argument, and it's made, I think most people would say, over the last 20 years that anti-war organizing, trying to mobilize people against the occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan was a lot more difficult than organizing against the Vietnam War, because you didn't have millions of people potentially drawn into it.
Yeah, military people are, really a segregated group compared. Most of society doesn't have, family in the military that's just distant to them. You talk about poverty and the military being an attraction for people. Syracuse now, and I've mentioned this on the podcast, latest census data, we're the worst city in the country, over 100,000 people, for child poverty and family poverty. We have a high school that's designed to get people into trades, but the top trade there is military and police. And then they got hairdressing, and they got a couple more like that. But, they just dedicated a high school to recruiting people into the military. And so we got a lot of these young folks from the low-income neighborhoods going in the military because they're tracked right into it out of junior high school. It's, I guess that's how they're recruiting.
Well, I also wanted to mention that upstate New York is really will be in real trouble because of a new commission that hopefully won't be seated, that is supposed to look over the asset and infrastructure needs of the VA, and they proposed shutting down the Biden VA. Following Trump's lead, is proposing shutting down the Albany VA. They've already shut down Troy VA. They're proposing building a new hospital in Buffalo, but they have no money to do that. And they want to shut down the Manhattan VA, the Brooklyn VA. It's quite a serious situation in New York.
A good issue for a gubernatorial candidate.
I'm taking notes. We got a VA in Syracuse it's right next to the State University, Upstate University Hospital, which has taken over a private hospital, Krause Hospital. At least it's not the other way around here. So I was not aware, except in general terms. So
yeah, I haven't seen what they proposed for Syracuse. I could certainly help you look it up. But one of the things that they're doing, and they want to shut down about 60 hospitals nationwide, many of them very much needed, all of them needed. And they're promising to build new super clinics and new hospitals, but the only thing that's assured in the plan is closures, because they don't have any money to rebuild. It will cost billions, over $200 billion to rebuild, and Congress will have to allocate that money. And Congress's track record on allocating money for VA building is very poor. And also, it costs money to close facilities, and there's no money to close them. I think this is a very serious situation. I mean, the RAND Corporation did a study of New York private sector providers, doctors, nurse practitioners, physical therapists, mental health practitioners, because as you know, Howie, New York has the 5th largest population of veterans in the country. And RAND established a very strict metric to determine whether these providers were competent and had the capacity to take care of veterans. And in the survey, only 2% met the criteria that RAND developed. I mean, 2%. And most providers knew nothing about veterans. They didn't know anything about their specific health problems. They didn't know anything about military culture. And when asked if they'd like to learn, the vast majority said no. We'd love to take taxpayer dollars to do our bit to take care of veterans, but we're really not interested in learning about their specific healthcare problems, which are very specific. Veterans have different healthcare problems than the average person in their age cohort. And so for New York State, this Asset and Infrastructure Review Commission, the AIR Commission, and this process is very serious and should be attended to.
Well, one thing being a candidate is you learn a lot. In every campaign I've gone into, I got my issues. We got our bullet point little platform, and then you find out there's something you didn't know that's of concern to a lot of people. So I'll definitely be back in touch with you so I can get up to speed on that issue.
We can be your consultants.
Thank you.
Unpaid consultants.
Yeah. The only people we're paying right now are petitioners, which we're running up on the hour. So I don't see any more questions on the screen. So yeah, like I said before, put the donate thing back up, please. We can use whatever help people can provide. We're doing our best here in New York. It concerns all of us who are Greens in the country, because if we can secure the ballot line, we get it for 2 years, which means whoever's the presidential candidate for the Green Party in 2024 will not have to try to get 45,000 signatures in 42 days to get on the ballot. Unless we can get that law changed. We got a law, we've written it, and some of the Democrats say they'll attend to it after the election. We'll see. And then I'm just going to show you the book again. It's scheduled to come out in August. It's from Duke University Press. And as y'all have seen from this discussion, even if you're not a veteran, veterans issues affect politics, healthcare, labor, and it's something we should all know more about. And so, look for this in August, and I urge you to read it. And with that, thank you, Steve and Suzanne, for coming
Thank
on.
you.
Howie,
Thank you
good
for
luck with the
having us.
campaign.
And I haven't told Matthew, but he said he'd do whatever he can after he gets his petition in. I'm gonna ask him to come on the show next Sunday or next Saturday to talk about what they're doing in North Carolina and you know, a whole lot of issues that Matthew's addressing in his campaign. That
Thank you.
Well, good luck to you both.
Take care.
Thank you.
Yeah.